Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be a proactive caregiver as well, by empowering you, the caregiver, rather than the care recipient. If you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of your loved one. Today, I want to continue with our previous conversation around deciphering the difference between dementia, delirium, and bipolar manic depression. I want to go a little bit deeper into the actual stages of dementia. Because just like the late Maya Angelou said, we do better when we know better. I, too, was able to do much better by mom and reduce my own level of stress from the unknown the more I learned. There are two things that made the biggest difference for me. One, understanding our anatomy, being the heart and gut and connection to the brain. And two, understanding the stages of dementia regardless of the type. But before I get into the details, please keep in mind this is strictly based on my personal experience caring for mom who lives with mixed dementia, and not at all intended to be medical advice or replacement for seeking care for yourself or your loved one. Dementia in itself is not a disease, but it's a loss of mental function in more than two areas. Dementia is far more than simply the loss of memory, but is noticeable because of the loss of memory and other mental abilities that affect daily living. It's rarely the sole cause because it may include a series of symptoms that affect language, judgment, memory, spatial abilities, and visual abilities. These stages, they represent the outward appearance as the brain continues to deteriorate and degenerate. The behaviors or responses, they vary based on the area of the brain which is actively deteriorating. So rather than focus on type, we're going to focus on the overlapping stages. Because during mom's early stages, there seemed to be an event or something that happens specifically that would help us to just kind of explain it away or excuse the reason for her lack of judgment in coping with life or loss of memory, like driving, for example, forgetting her way home or forgetting her way to somewhere and ending up a whole town away eventually. Being able to laugh at ourselves is healthy, but when the joke is repeated, and there begins to be this feeling of it's not so much a silly behavior anymore. Or in some cases, like mom would say, acting stupid. Then it's that time to take a pause and take that closer look. Mom used to do things silly, and then she would eventually respond with, "I'm so stupid, I can't believe I did that." Followed with, "Oh, well, no big deal." That started to happen a lot more often as time went by. We would all laugh rather than stop to think, why did something just take place? Why did that just happen the way it happened? Or how is that possible? What made sense in that moment may not be what was actually happening. More so, it was what we were wanting to make the sense out of. There might have been an indication of what that behavior was pointing towards. But we kind of fell into this. We saw what we wanted to see, not what was actually there. So, the stages of dementia. The ones I want to go over are 7 stages. And they can vary and they can overlap, which makes it even harder to determine what's happening and when. So early on in the first stages, there's no real impairment. There's nothing that is actually detectable. These are those moments that I was mentioning that something odd would happen and we would just kind of laugh it off or go on about our days. If you were in a family gathering and something happened, you'd kind of pause to think, oh no, something's not right. And then it would be out of your mind because it just happened that one time. There's no real memory problems. There's no real evidence of other symptoms together. Often the minor symptoms are dismissed because maybe they are lacking in vitamins. Maybe there is some sort of hormonal imbalance. Maybe they're dealing with an infection like a UTI. Urinary tract infections are often blamed for that dementia-like mentality or behavior. At this early stage, stage 1, there's not as much need for sleep. They're able to maintain a normal routine. In fact, that routine is vital because it's that muscle memory, that mental muscle memory that keeps things going. And then time passes. A year, maybe 2, maybe 3. And that stage 2 starts to come around. There's more of a mild decline. They begin to lose things around the house. Maybe the car keys are misplaced. Maybe their purse is misplaced. Maybe their wallet is misplaced. Things that they would normally have, and they know exactly where they were every day, all the time, and suddenly they start losing things around the house. The remote, it's not just tucked away in the cushion of the couch. Can't remember where you put it down last. They become a little bit more socially awkward. There's an increase in the loss of reaction. Like they're listening to you, they're hearing something, but the reaction isn't there. And sometimes you might go, did you hear me? Did you hear what I just said? Because you're not seeing a reaction you thought you would see, or a reaction they may have had before. Their sense of logic starts to slip. And their judgment definitely starts to slip. They may not have enough awareness that these things are starting to slip. So they are not as able to recover from a mistake or cover it up if they knew it before. If they were aware of something happening before that was definitely a mistake. That silly moment that they can't laugh off because it wasn't exactly a silly moment, a laughable moment. They begin to struggle more with normal daily tasks, like getting dressed, knowing what to wear for the right weather, knowing how to layer things, snapping the buttons on their blouse, zipping up their pants or snapping them, or pushing the button on their jeans. It starts off with those little things, the delicate little things, those little things we dismiss. And then we get to stage 3, and now we are in more of a mild decline. Friends and family are able to notice the memory and the cognitive problems. It's starting to be a little bit more obvious. If you suspect it and you actually schedule some cognitive tests, or if you find yourself in the doctor's office for one thing or another, and the doctor actually asks questions, sometimes those responses cue the doctor into knowing they need to ask yet another form of question. And sometimes those questions lead to a request to take some cognitive tests. But they're actually able to perform well on these cognitive steps in stage 3. They're actually able to go through the steps of the test and still have just a slight detection of impaired cognitive function. Your loved one may be using humor as much as possible, more often than not, to hide their shortcomings. They may begin to struggle to find the right words during conversations. You know, that thing. You know what I'm talking about? That thing I can't remember. Or they start forgetting names. They start calling each other different names. Siblings, spouses. Of course, it's not as obvious with your spouse if you're always referring to them as honey, baby, sweetheart. But you may come across other friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and you can't place their face with a name. They may struggle with planning and organizing. This seemed to be a problem for Mom. One of the things that we didn't recognize at the time was the planning and organizing. You know, many people, when they go on a trip, they know the day they're going, they know what they need for that trip, they know what to pack, they know the length of their commute, or even an airport, when to check in. Mom got to the point where she wasn't really planning. It was that spur of the moment thing. And yes, there is something to say to be adventurous and just live life as much as by the seat of your pants as you can, but there is some level of planning and organizing. She would actually grab what she had, throw it in the suitcase at the time, and get in the car with the dog and go on a trip. She would just take a road trip. No planning involved. No contacting others to let them know, hey, I'm going to be gone for some time, or I'm going to go visit a family member in Florida, for example. In this stage 3, there's a little bit more noticeable carelessness with their appearance. And there's a little bit less facial emotions as well. At this point, they have lost minimal brain tissue. Time continues. Another year, another 2, maybe 3 years goes by. Now they're in stage 4. They're in more of a moderate decline. This moderate decline means at this point that it's believed that they have lost roughly 4 ounces of brain tissue. At this point, they're starting to act or behave more of like a 12 to 20-year-old. Having problems with simple math becomes an issue. They may forget details to their life's history or have poor short-term memory. This is when people start to notice. At this point, because now some of those things that they were laughing off before, or there was a certain event that took place just so happened at the same time, you had a reason, an excuse to explain it away. Now, things are happening more regularly. Their behaviors are changing and becoming more obvious. The struggle to become more able to manage their finances is more obvious. Their hygiene is starting to be completely dismissed and forgotten. This point was the point that we started the struggle of Mom showering regularly and changing her clothes. But at this point, it wasn't as obvious for us because we were only checking in with her occasionally. We had our lives. We were grown up. We're adults. We're living our lives. We had jobs. We have children with their school routines. So we would have those occasional check-ins, occasional phone calls. How are you doing, Mom? Everything's fine. Everything's great. We would actually go in to see her, whether it was if I had a chance to step in, midday during my lunch break or Sunday after church. We would check in to see her, have some lunch. And it wasn't until I did that repeatedly 3 weeks in a row that I could see if I saw her early on in the week, then by Sunday, visiting her, she was still in the same clothes. Food stains all over those clothes. Conversation started to be reduced. There was less of a casual flow of conversation and more of yes or no answers, more of me probing and asking questions to get answers to things that just didn't seem normal. And even some of those yes or no answers became more of the head nods or shakes. Driving privileges definitely had to come to a halt. There were more times that she would get in her vehicle and drive, at one point, to work. This was definitely before she had retired, but she would drive to work and arrive late because she forgot her way to work. Her students, being that she was a teacher, her students learned to stay calm in the first period and be ready for her to step in so that she could step in and just give an assignment, take a pop quiz, and just kind of cover that she was running late and why she was running late. Driving on the wrong side of the road. That started to happen, and some of our family members thought it was silly. It was crazy. And there were the moments that we, again, we could laugh it off and excuse it. Oh, that was because of this or that. Not wanting to accept that things were actually happening more frequent, and they were definitely more obvious. The desire for sweet foods started to take over the desire to eat otherwise healthy. We grew up on a Puerto Rican diet. Rice and beans, fried pork chops, fried chicken, fried bananas. Rarely ever did we have salad. We did have some fruits, a lot of watermelon, a lot of oranges, a lot of things that we could get in bulk. But that kind of sweet, the watermelon, orange, wasn't enough. It was the overindulgence of ice cream. Instead of a small little bowl, it became the pint. And if you let her, she would have ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The more I visited at this time, the more I felt the need to check in on her. Because at this stage 4, the moderate decline, there was something obviously wrong. Not knowing what, we could just say she didn't sleep good. She was up napping or up throughout the night, so she was napping during the day. I would wake her up often times when I would come to visit, seeing the clothes that hadn't been changed, the food stains, the wrappers around on the counters, the junk food, like a nest building on the couch. More time went by. So another year, another 2 years, maybe 3 years. And now mom is in stage 5, moderate, severe decline. By stage 5, if it wasn't apparent before, it is definitely obvious by stage 5. And unfortunately, this is when people realize something is not right and they start going to the doctors by stage 5. They start seeing the general who refers you to the gerontologist or the neurologist. This stage 5 is often split between an early stage and a late stage 5. It's usually about another year to 3 years that this early and late stage takes place, because there are, even in this stage in itself, drastic changes. This stage is typically when diagnosis begins to be rendered. It takes a couple of months to get a diagnosis if something more definitive to a type is available. So many more symptoms are happening. It's happening more often. There's a variation of behaviors. And they are definitely more consistent with maybe a time of day, a time in the evening. There are more triggers that you start to pick up on. If you might have heard of the term sundowning. They're really good in the mornings, but they get to be really irritable by the early afternoon or late afternoon, early evening time. At this point in stage 5, it's believed that they've lost roughly a half a pound to 1 pound of brain tissue. They begin to behave like an 8 to 12-year-old. They can appear normal and act as if they don't need any help, but in reality, they need help with 2 or more of their active daily living skills. These active daily living skills are what we refer to their personal hygiene or grooming, how they're dressing, toileting. Are they needing transferring or ambulating? How they're eating. Do they need help with eating? Or are they eating at all? They definitely need help with managing finances and medications, food preparation, housekeeping, and laundry. At this point, you might start noticing, if you're able to visit as often, notices in the mail of maybe electricity shut off notices because they're not remembering to pay their bills. The medications, for me, I started noticing Mom was stockpiling her medication because she didn't think she needed it, or she was going to save it for when she really needs it, or I just don't like taking pills. And so medication reminders would come in, and we would pick them up and we would drop them off for her. And then we started noticing she had 2 pill bottles filled of something that she stopped taking. She definitely needed the pill box by the day and everything arranged for what she needed to take in the morning and what she needed to take in the evening. Her food preparation, she no longer made food. I think the only thing she was focused on was stuff that she knew of, the easy stuff. She would make coffee. She would make toast. She would make cream of wheat. She would buy snacks that it was just a matter of getting to the kitchen and opening the snack, or even leaving the box in the living room next to her so she wouldn't have to prepare anything. And the housekeeping, absolutely. The energy is not there. They dismiss that they need to do it. It doesn't have to get done. But the energy is not there to do it. The dishes will pile up, the trash can, the dust, just the normal living area starts to become more of a stagnant area of where they are now just existing. For Mom, she would sleep on the couch and fall asleep on the couch and stay there. Sometimes she would say, I was just taking a quick nap during the day when I was just visiting. So I wasn't able to see how often she was napping, where she was napping. And eventually the couch was covered with a pillow and blanket. And it was obvious in the bedroom that she was not sleeping in her bedroom anymore. The couch became her nest, her safe place. Laundry wasn't getting done. And even when I began to step in and do some laundry for her while prepping some food that she would have, an easy meal that she could just put in the microwave later, I started noticing less and less clothes coming into the laundry because I realized I needed to make more of a point to be there as much on a daily basis as possible because she was changing clothes. And at this point, in this stage 5, especially as they get closer to the late stage 5, they begin to fall or become that fall risk. That is another thing I noticed, that just picking mom up and going in the car to either the grocery store or the doctor's office, watching her take her steps. She was no longer taking normal strides. Her gait was off, and sometimes she was no longer walking heel toe, heel toe. She was walking on the balls of her feet, making it really easy to tip forward, not knowing if I needed to walk in front of her or walk behind her in the hopes of being able to break her fall or catch her one way or the other. And then eventually insisting, because she didn't need my help, but insisting that I walk and in arm with her just because I wanted to be closer to her, but also so that I could securely hold her. So if she did lose her balance and she did take that wrong step, that I could at least help a little bit ease that fall, whether we were both going down or not. So even though they might be experiencing significant confusion at this point, they are also having the inability to recall simple details like phone numbers. So you might assume they would call you if they need something, but they may not remember your phone number. And even though I had it programmed in her cell phone, she wasn't going to call. She knew I was going to show up. She just didn't know when, so she didn't need to call. Writing phone numbers down if they still have a landline. And believe it or not, many people do, but writing those phone numbers down next to the landline so they could see the numbers and the names of who they're calling would be helpful. And yet, even knowing this, where they're struggling in these moments, you still find yourself in that point of denial. I know I did, because in these moments when I'm visiting with her during the day or those short evenings, we would eventually hit a good day or a good conversation, and she would recall personal history, personal stories, and we would have this conversation about when she was growing up as a kid, when she enjoyed one thing or the other, or she enjoyed one aunt or uncle's house over the other. And that was my indication in hindsight later down the road, thinking when she was talking about these things and recalling certain things, it was because that's where she was mentally. Not that we were having that great conversation thinking, oh, it's okay. This isn't as bad as I thought. She's still okay. She's still there. She's still talking. Yes, she was. And she is. She was talking at the point of where her mind was mentally. And so that between the age 8 to 12, you think you're having this conversation and she's relating to something, but she's having a memory, a long-term memory, because unfortunately, the short-term memory goes first. The long-term memory is still intact. She may not remember the details exactly as they happened, or all of the details, but long-term memory was still there. I cherish those moments, because as the conversation slipped away, it was a change of another thing for us to adapt to, and a change of having to accept the peace of the silence. So a couple more years go by, maybe one more, maybe two more. And now we're in stage 6. There is severe decline. At this point in stage 6, it is believed that your loved one has lost roughly 1 to 1.5 pounds, up to 2 pounds of brain tissue And you're talking about a brain that weighs 3 pounds. They behave more like a 2 to 4-year-old with serious loss of abilities. They will need constant supervision. They require professional care at this point. Incidentally, yes, at stage 6, they would need care. But by the time you reach stage 5, you absolutely need to consider the next steps of care, of plan, whether they are living with you so that you can have 24/7 eyes on them and care, or you start to locate a facility, a community that is not just an assisted living, but that is a memory care facility. Because between late stage 5 and stage 6, their on-call care, their constant supervision becomes more than the typical caregiver can handle, more than I was willing to admit to. I wanted to do it all. And eventually I had to accept, as things were happening and changing for me, for us together, I had to accept this was more than I could handle. This was beyond my limitations, beyond my boundaries, beyond my lessons learned. At some point, you have to come to terms, like I did, and accept that professional care is required. So as they're in this stage 6, they are experiencing more confusion. There is a little bit more of an unawareness of environment and surroundings. They may focus on only what they can see, and in many cases, it's the TV, the television in front of them. There are major personality changes with the potential behavioral problems. And again, depending on the type, they may be a little bit more combative because they are confused. They may not know who you are, why you're there, and that the fact that you're actually trying to help them, but it may seem like a stranger's in their house or a stranger's in their personal space. They're absolutely going to need assistance with their active daily living skills, especially for toileting and bathing. This was an area that became a battle trying to get mom to shower. Was just an absolute battle. There are some tips and tricks that you can learn, but again, at some point, you have to accept a boundary. You have to accept a limitation. And with them not being able to recognize faces, and you're trying to get them into a very vulnerable place as far as being in a shower, you're going to get a lot more protest. I know I did. In stage 6, they also begin to lose control of their bladder and bowels. If they're still able to walk on their own, they may begin to wander. They may come to that point where they're trying to find home. They want to go home. They may be living in a home with you. They may not be in that facility just yet, but they may still be wanting home because at this point, as that 2 or 4-year-old in their mind, they want that home that they remembered at 2 and 4. The sleep disturbances begin causing sleep patterns to get totally out of sync. Their natural daily circadian rhythms are thrown off. They begin to stay up throughout the night and sleep throughout the day. That made it very difficult for me when mom was still living with us. And this is where the stages overlap, because in her stages of stage 5 and late stage 5, as she approached this level, trying to go to bed at night and have a solid night rest without any interruptions became more of a challenge. She was getting up to go to the restroom more often, And in the dark, that's when I'm worried of fall. That fall risk is still present. And in the middle of the night, being half asleep, you're not thinking as much as you would even during the day. Watching every step, fumbling over the sheets, trying to get out of the bed itself and not fumbling out and falling to the floor. And then while the sun rises and the day comes about, she's able to nap during the day while I had to stay awake and maintain the rest of our household. She and I were not the only one in the house. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. As the brain loses more tissue, there is less and less conversation, less memory, less interaction. Now it's the physical body that is declining. At first, you see in their eyes the confusion and the disconnect. And then eventually you see the physical impact on their body. The brain is now struggling to remember how to function. So now we get into stage 7. The severe, very severe decline. This is the final stage. With roughly 2 pounds or more of brain tissue loss, the body begins to shut down. With a significant loss of brain, the body struggles to know how to continue functioning through loss of control of bowels, bladder, and even swallowing. Your loved one may be able to utter some words, maybe some phrases, but is most likely incoherent with an inability to respond to their environment or have insight into their condition, what's actually happening to them. They are now behaving like an infant or a 2-year-old without much energy at all. And this is usually the time when hospice services, if they're not already in place, they absolutely need to be considered and brought in. See, every type of dementia is different. And so as we discuss these different types, each individual level of progression is dependent on many factors. Knowing who your loved one is before they begin stage 3 is helpful, but unless you have a willing participant to actively fight the progression, then you may save your body the effects of stress by understanding their type of dementia along with the stages. This made a huge difference for me. The unknown was anxiety, panic, stress, worry, everything that sums up to fear. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what to expect next. But understanding the stages helped to alleviate so much stress and fear. It gave me the time to go through my own personal process of acceptance and grieving. Because as we went through each stage, it was clear we are still on this steady progress. At some point, I had to stop. Not that I gave up on hope, but just that I accepted the journey she was on. The journey we are on together. The more I understood this painful process, the more her behaviors made sense, and the less I fought with her. The more I could accept she wasn't doing things on purpose to annoy me. She wasn't doing things on purpose to upset me. She wasn't just trying to be difficult. Life with living with dementia is difficult. Time is so precious, no matter what stage they're in. So don't give up in learning to make more and make the most of the time you have to make more memories. I know that there are times that is difficult, that the emotions just take over, the grieving effects take over. So I want to encourage you to keep looking beyond the veil. I want to encourage you to seek therapy as you watch your loved one go through these stages. It doesn't get any easier stage by stage. I want to caution many of you to not think back on genetics and make any assumptions that what they are living through is going to be what you will live through. There is still the nature versus nurture concept. And if you live the way your great parents did, great grandparents, your parents, then you might be repeating history, learned behaviors, rather than be susceptible to genetics. Keep in mind the risk factors for dementia. Because aside of any genetic history, head trauma, multiple head injuries, or the transient ischemic attack, or TIAs, which were the minor strokes. The lifestyle factors, such as smoking, excessive alcohol, and unhealthy diet and physical inactivity, all contribute to what becomes what creates that form of dementia, that type. So I know some of this sounds very heavy and daunting, and it may even, hearing the words may even scare you. Is this where my loved one is? Is this where they're heading? But it's not meant to be fear. It's meant to be knowledge. It's meant to help you find a place where you are comfortable to be in the present moment, to not be stuck in the past and not fear the pending future. Because what makes sense in the moment may be what we want to see instead of what the behavior might be indicating. And just remember, you're not alone. Keep this in mind. You are not alone. I hope this gave you more food for thought. Until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalizelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.